All right, let's dive into backend servers.
Okay.
And we're going to be tackling Node.js and Express.js.
All right.
You can think of it as like building the engine room for your next killer app.
Oh.
So like whether it's handling user logins or managing all that data behind the scenes,
Yeah.
you need a solid server
You need a solid server.
to make the magic happen.
Exactly. And it all starts with a blank canvas,
Right.
We'll see how something as simple as typing npm init in your terminal
Yeah.
sets the stage for a complex project. It's really fascinating how these seemingly small steps
Yeah.
lay the foundation for something much bigger.
So that npm init command,
Yeah.
that's how we kick off a Node project, right?
Exactly.
And then this package.json file appears.
Right.
Kind of like an index for our project,
That's a great way to think about it.
keeping track of all the moving parts.
Yeah, exactly. And just like you wouldn't toss all your clothes in one giant pile. Developers organize their code too. That's where the SRC folder comes in.
Okay.
It's where we'll neatly store all our source code.
Right.
Keep things tidy, easy to manage as our project grows.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So before we get to the main attraction, Express.js,
Okay.
maybe we could test things out with a quick hello world program.
Sure.
Just a little console.log. Make sure everything's running smoothly.
Yeah, it's like a quick checkup.
Right.
Making sure our node environment is all set before we start building something more complex. Like making sure your oven is working before you bake a cake right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen some pretty hilarious memes about the world of Node.js.
Oh, yeah.
One compares the size of node modules,
Oh.
which is a folder for dependencies,
Right.
to a black hole.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Oh, the infamous Node modules. It's
Yeah.
where all the dependencies for your project live.
Okay.
Think of it like a toolbox. Each tool is a dependency. So Express.js itself relies on other tools like body parser,
Okay.
which handles data, and cookie, which manages those little website trackers.
Right.
But here's the catch. Each of those tools might have its own set of dependencies,
Right.
leading to a potentially massive node modules folder,
Yeah.
hence the black hole comparison.
Okay, so Express.js is like the main tool.
Yeah.
But it relies on a bunch of other tools,
Right.
which might need their own tools.
Exactly.
And suddenly it's a whole toolbox explosion.
That's a great way to put it. But that's where the power of Node.js and its package manager, NPM, comes in.
Right.
It manages all these dependencies for you,
Okay.
making sure you have the right versions and everything plays nicely together.
Speaking of versions, we install Express.js using that command npm install express.
Right.
And then another file pops up,
Hmm.
package.lock.json.
Yeah.
It seems like a secret twin of package.json.
It's not really a twin,
Oh.
more like a detailed record keeper.
Okay.
So package.json is like your shopping list.
Right.
It tells NPM what dependencies you need. Allows for some flexibility in the versions.
Okay.
But package.json records the exact version of each dependency that's installed.
Right.
That way, anyone working on your project will have the same versions. Ensures consistency, avoids those "it works on my machine" headaches.
So it's about making sure everyone's on the same page, even as things update.
Exactly.
I guess that's crucial when you're working on larger projects with multiple developers.
Absolutely. And this all ties back to the concept of semantic versioning,
Right.
which sounds a lot more complicated than it is. Basically, it's a system that uses numbers
Yeah.
to indicate major changes, new features, bug fixes in software, helps developers manage updates without accidentally breaking things.
Right.
Imagine if every time your phone updated,
Yeah.
it completely changed how you make calls.
Yeah.
Frustrating, right?
Oh.
Semantic versioning prevents that kind of chaos in software development.
Okay, so package-lock.json and semantic versioning
Yeah.
are all about keeping things organized,
Yeah.
making sure everyone's working with the same set of tools.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Now, are we finally ready to build our server?
Let's do it.
I'm ready to see some action.
All right.
Okay, so we're using express.js to write the code for our server.
Okay.
And it seems pretty straightforward so far.
There.
There's this function, app.listen,
Yeah.
which tells our server to start listening for requests on a specific port,
Okay.
like 3000.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
stresses .send
Yeah.
lets us send a message back to whoever visits our website.
Right?
It's kind of like our server saying, hello, world.
It's like setting up a virtual phone line
Okay.
and having your server answer the calls.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So someone types in our website address,
Yeah.
our server picks up the call
Right.
and sends back a friendly hello message. That's pretty cool. But what if we want our server to do more than just say hello?
Right.
What if we want to handle different requests differently.
Yeah, that's where routing comes in.
Okay.
Think of it like setting up different departments in your company. Each department handles specific requests right.
Right.
With Express.js, we can define specific routes
Right.
using app.use.
Hmm.
That way, our server can tailor its response based on the URL requested.
So instead of just one general hello message,
Yeah.
we could have different responses for different pages on our website.
Exactly. It's like having different phone extensions for
Right.
different departments.
Okay.
Each route acts as a unique endpoint, responding to specific requests.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
Cool.
But I can imagine that making changes to our code
Yeah.
and then having to manually restart the server every time
Right.
would get old fast.
You bring up a good point.
Is there a way around that?
That's where a handy tool called nodemon comes in.
Okay.
Nodemon automatically restarts the server whenever it detects changes to our code. It's like having a personal assistant who watches your code and refreshes everything for you.
So no more clicking that restart button every time we make a change.
Yeah.
Nodemon sounds like a real time saver. But we can't install every single tool manually, right?
Right.
There must be a better way to manage all this.
There is. Remember that package.json file we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
It comes in handy here too.
Okay.
We can add scripts to package.json to automate tasks like running the server.
Hmm.
For example, we can define a script called start for running the server in production mode,
Okay.
and another script called dev for running it in development mode using nodemon.
Right.
Then all we have to do is type npm run start or npm run dev in our terminal. And it does the heavy lifting for us.
No, we're basically giving our project a set of instructions on how to run itself.
That's pretty clever.
Okay, so we've got our server listening, handling different requests, and even automatically reloading, thanks to nodemon.
Yeah.
This is really starting to feel like a real web app.
It's amazing what you can accomplish with just a few lines of code right.
Yeah.
But remember, we're still laying the foundation.
Right.
The real excitement comes when we start adding dynamic content and features that make our server truly interactive.
Okay. Now I'm really intrigued. But I think we've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah.
So let's take a break here and come back to dive into those more dynamic aspects in the next part.
Sounds good.
All right, let's jump back into our server building adventure. We've got the basics down, but now I'm curious about how we move beyond static hello messages.
Right.
And start creating a truly dynamic and interactive experience.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Imagine you're building a social media app.
Okay.
You wouldn't just want to display the same feed to everyone, right?
Right.
You'd need to handle user logins, posts, likes, comments,
Yeah.
all sorts of actions that require the server to do more than just send back a pre-written response.
Okay, so how do we actually tell our server how to handle all those different actions? I'm guessing it involves understanding different types of HTTP requests, right?
You got it.
I've heard of GEDI requests, which is like asking the server for information. But there are others too, aren't there?
You're exactly right. GEDI requests are like asking the server for a web page, an image, or some data. But when you want to send information to the server, like when you submit a form or update your profile,
Yeah.
that's where other request types come in.
Okay.
There's POST for sending new data,
Mm.
PUT for updating existing data,
Right.
delete for deleting data,
Yeah.
and even PAT-TCH for making partial modifications.
So it's like different verbs for different actions.
That's a great way to think about it.
GEDI is for retrieving information.
Yeah.
PST is for sending new information.
Right.
TID is for updating and so on.
Exactly. And Express.js makes it incredibly easy to handle these different request types.
Okay.
It's like setting up different paths for different actions. If you visit a website, your browser sends a UEP request to the server,
Right.
and the server responds with the web page.
Okay.
But if you submit a form, your browser sends a POST request with the form data,
Yeah.
and the server knows what to do with it.
So it's all about setting up those clear pathways,
Right.
different routes for different actions,
Exactly.
and making sure the server knows how to respond based on the type of request it receives.
Precisely. And that brings us to the concept of middleware.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about Express.js relying on other libraries like body parser?
Yeah.
Middleware is like a set of helpers that sit between the incoming request and your server's logic. They can perform tasks like parsing incoming data,
Okay.
handling cookies,
Right.
or even logging requests for debugging purposes.
So it's like having a team of assistants who handle those more mundane tasks
Yeah,
so your server can focus on the bigger picture.
exactly. Body parser, for example, takes the raw data from a form submission
Okay.
and transforms it into a nice, organized JavaScript object that your server can easily work with.
Okay, so that's how we handle the different types of requests and make sure the data is in a format our server understands.
Right.
But what about actually using that data to create a dynamic response?
Right.
For example, if someone submits their name in a form, how we use that to personalize our server's response.
That's where your server-side code comes in.
Okay.
Once you have the parsed data, you can use it to do all sorts of things.
Right.
You could store it in a database,
Okay.
send it to another service, or use it to generate a custom response, like saying, hello, name.
So it's like connecting the dots.
Exactly.
The user sends data, the middleware prepares it,
Right.
and then our server's code steps in to process that data and decide what to do next.
Exactly. You're starting to see the flow of how a dynamic web application works.
I am.
But there's another crucial aspect we need to consider. Security.
Right, security. That seems especially important when we're dealing with user data. We don't want any bad guys getting their hands on sensitive information.
Security is paramount in web development.
Right.
And luckily, Express.js provides tools and best practices to help us build secure applications.
Okay.
For starters, there's input validation. Think of it like a bouncer at a club.
Okay.
It checks the incoming data to make sure it meets the expected criteria. For example, if you're asking for an email address,
Right.
you want to make sure it actually looks like an email address.
So it's about making sure the data is legitimate and not some sneaky attempt to hack our system.
Exactly. Input validation helps prevent malicious code or unexpected data from causing problems.
Okay.
Then there's authentication, verifying a user's identity, like asking for a username and password.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like making sure you're talking to the right person before sharing any sensitive information.
Exactly.
But once we've verified who they are, we might also need to control what they're allowed to do right.
You're absolutely right. That's where authorization comes in.
Okay.
It's about controlling access to different parts of your application or specific actions based on a user's role or permissions.
Okay.
For example, you might have an admin user who has access to everything,
Right.
while a regular user can only view and edit their own profile.
So it's a multi-layered approach.
Exactly.
First, we validate the data.
Right.
Then we authenticate the user. And finally, we authorize their actions to make sure they're only doing what they're supposed to do.
Precisely. Security is all about thinking ahead.
Right.
And putting safeguards in place to protect your application and your users' data.
This is all starting to feel very real world.
Cool.
Like we're actually building the backbone of a functioning application.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, in most real-world apps, our server needs to talk to other systems.
Right.
Like databases or external APIs.
Yeah.
How do we handle that?
That's a great question. And it brings us to one of the most powerful features of Node.js, asynchronous programming. Imagine you're ordering food at a restaurant.
Okay.
You don't just stand there frozen while they prepare your meal, right?
Right.
You might chat with your friends, read the menu, or even check your phone while you wait.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So instead of our server waiting for a task to finish before moving on, it can do other things in the meantime.
Exactly. Asynchronous programming allows your code to continue running other tasks while it waits for time-consuming operations, like fetching data from a database or making a request to an external API. This prevents your server from getting stuck and keeps things running smoothly even when dealing with multiple requests or complex operations.
So it's all about multitasking and making sure our server doesn't get bogged down by long-running tasks?
Exactly.
But how do we actually implement asynchronous programming in our code? Those terms I've heard thrown around, like promises and async await, they seem a bit daunting.
Don't worry, they might sound complex.
Okay.
But they're actually quite elegant tools that make asynchronous programming much more manageable. Promises are like a guarantee that something will eventually happen. Think of it like ordering something online. You get a promise that your package will arrive even though it might take some time.
So instead of getting the result immediately, we get a promise that it's coming.
Exactly.
And we can handle different outcomes based on whether that promise is fulfilled or not.
Exactly. And that's where async await comes in.
Yeah.
It's a more recent addition to JavaScript
Right.
that makes working with promises even more intuitive.
Mm.
It allows you to write asynchronous code that looks and feels more like synchronous code,
Wait.
making it easier to read and understand.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we need to dedicate some time to really unravel these concepts.
Yeah.
They seem like essential tools for any aspiring back-end developer. All right, let's tackle these asynchronous programming concepts you mentioned, promises and async await.
Okay.
They sound a bit like something out of a sci-fi movie.
They might sound futuristic,
Yeah.
but they're actually pretty straightforward once you grasp the basic idea.
Okay.
Imagine you're asking a friend to pick up some groceries for you.
Okay.
You don't just stand at their door waiting until they return right.
Right.
You trust that they'll get the groceries
Yeah.
and carry on with your day.
Okay, so it's about trusting that a task will be completed even if it takes some time.
Exactly. That's essentially what a promise is in JavaScript.
Okay.
A guarantee that an asynchronous operation, like fetching data from a database, will eventually either complete successfully or fail.
Mm-hmm.
While that operation is running in the background, your code can continue doing other things.
Right.
It's like sending your friend to the store while you get started on cooking.
So it's like having multiple chefs in the kitchen, each working on a different part of the meal.
That's a great analogy. And just like you might check on your friend's progress periodically.
Right, like, hey, are those groceries here yet?
Exactly.
Okay.
You can use then and .catch methods to handle different outcomes of a promise.
Okay.
If the promise is fulfilled, meaning the operation was successful, the code inside, then we'll execute.
Okay.
If the promise is rejected, meaning something went wrong, the code inside .catch will execute.
Mm.
It's like having a plan for both success and failure.
So it's all about setting up those contingency plans, making sure our code knows what to do in different scenarios.
Right.
But you mentioned async await makes working with promises even easier.
Absolutely. Async await is like adding a sprinkle of syntactic sugar to your asynchronous code,
Okay.
making it look and feel more like synchronous code, which is easier for us humans to read and understand.
Syntactic sugar. So it's about
Yeah.
making the code more palatable.
Exactly. It simplifies the way you write and structure your asynchronous code. You simply use the keyword async before a function declaration to mark it as asynchronous.
Okay.
Then inside that function, you can use the keyword await before a promise to pause execution until that promise is settled, either fulfilled or rejected.
Mm.
It's like saying, hold on, let's wait for this task to finish before moving on.
So instead of having those in dot blocks scattered throughout our code,
Yeah.
we can write it in a more linear top-to-bottom way.
Exactly. Async await makes the flow of your code much clearer and easier to follow.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We've gone from a simple hello world program to a server that can handle different request types, process user data, consider security measures, and even communicate with other systems asynchronously.
Yeah.
It's incredible how much you can build with just a few lines of code.
It really is. It's amazing how these building blocks come together, isn't it?
It is.
And the beauty of Node.js and Express.js is that they provide a solid foundation
Right?
for building all sorts of applications, from simple APIs to complex real-time web platforms.
So for our listeners who are now inspired to build their own servers,
Yeah.
what would you say is the most important takeaway from all of this?
I think the key is to remember that building a server is a journey, not a destination. You start with the fundamentals, like understanding how to set up a basic server and handle requests.
Right.
Then you gradually add more layers of complexity, like dynamic content, security measures, and asynchronous communication. The more you learn and experiment, the more powerful your servers will become.
And the beauty is there's always more to learn. The world of web development is constantly evolving, with new tools and techniques emerging all the time.
Exactly. So embrace the challenge, never stop learning, and remember to have fun along the way.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive into the world of Node.js and Express.js.
My pleasure.
Until next time, happy coding, everyone.